people describing it as literally seeing complete blackness. And we saw some people running after the second tower collapsed. They were looking above. You just saw this mushroom effect. It's hard to even imagine what was going through people's mind. We've heard some firefighters say other fire crews on the area thought they were burned. They thought their eyes were burned. They couldn't see. But in fact, it was this heavy, dense, dark soot covering them. And as you see in this video here, it looks almost like snow. And you can see how hard it was for people to even see, if they did have all their faculties about them, to try to help other people.
Sheriff Ken Jenny mentioned this a while ago that BSO would be dispatched. From the Miami Herald, we picked it up just a few minutes ago here.
And as you hold that up for another moment, Craig, this is really what so many people were watching this morning. You likely were one of them, watching the news just before 9 o'clock, getting ready for your day. The one tower had already been hit. And then all of a sudden, just when most folks at home were wondering what this was, they didn't know, no one was even thinking terrorist attack. They were just thinking there was a plane crash. All of a sudden, everyone witnessed this second jet, a major U.S. jetliner, come in and crash into the second tower. And that was when everyone started realizing what this really was, a major, highly orchestrated terrorist attack.
All right, now I believe we want to head back out west to Los Angeles. We have a crew there. 7's Beatrice Canals has been at the LAX, the Los Angeles airport. You've got something for us, Beatrice?
Well, Craig, we have to hurry here because we're being informed right now by police officers that the FBI agents who are here want everyone to move out. Now, really, the only ones left here in the airport are a few employees and media. As you can see here, about 200 members of the media here all day long waiting to get the latest information. But just moments ago, we were informed, and as you'll see, they're packing their stuff. We need to get out. This is as a safety precaution. They do not want to take any chances with the possibility of a threat, although they tell us that they do not have any specific threat. A short while ago, we were forced to go from where we are here, Terminal 4, all the way down to Terminal 6. It's quite a distance. The reason is police officers and the FBI feared that there could be some sort of suspicious package in Terminal 2, which is right across from where we are. Now, apparently, they looked into the possibility that there was a suspicious package or some sort of vehicle that they deemed suspicious, but they ruled that out and allowed us to come back to Terminal 4. However, we were just informed, as we mentioned, that we have to leave the airport. They want to evacuate the entire area. For quite some time now, for hours, the inside of these terminals, the airport itself has been like a ghost town, empty, and that's because passengers, employees, anyone who was here earlier today was forced to leave and told to get out because they wanted to run a search of the airport and make sure that there was no threat here. For some reason, they allowed the media to remain here, and live trucks were lined up all along this terminal here, Terminal 4, all day long as we brought you live reports. However, as we mentioned, all of them will shortly be packing up and leaving. Unclear where we will be stationed from then. But as of right now, they are telling us that we need to move out of here as a safety precaution, and no one will be allowed.
All right, Beatrice Canals, will allow you to move, and thanks so much for giving us that late information. We might mention to everybody Beatrice had been in Los Angeles for the Latin Grammy Awards scheduled for tonight, one of many, many events that have been canceled now.
We are awaiting more word from Miami-Dade Mayor Alex Pinellas. He'll be giving us an update any moment. We will take you there. And certainly on a day like this, everyone wants to just be home and surrounded by their loved ones. We know that most city and county offices are closed down, and hopefully you are at home with your loved ones. But if you're waiting for a cruise ship, we have heard from the sheriff in Broward County telling us that 3 cruise ships will be allowed to dock tonight, actually this afternoon, later tonight around 8, and tomorrow morning. If you are waiting for loved ones from one of those cruise ships at Port Everglades, they will be allowed to dock, and those passengers will be allowed to disembark.
We're getting some new information about the whereabouts of President Bush. As you know, he had been in Sarasota earlier today at an education event there. Upon learning of all this, he scrambled to Air Force One, not clear where his destination was going to be. His first stop was an Air Force base at Shreveport, Louisiana. We heard from him on tape there. He was then set off to an Air Force base in Omaha, Nebraska, where he had been secured for a short time. Now we are just getting word that the president will be returning to Washington. Not clear if it's the White House. As we've told you, a number of his top national security advisors, Condoleezza Rice is there, Vice President Cheney is there. So at this hour, President Bush is heading back to Washington. Not clear whether they will assemble at the White House in the Situation Room or whether they'll go to another location.
And do know as well, if you are, we have so many international flights coming in and out of Miami and Fort Lauderdale, Hollywood International airports. Those flights, any international flights that were in the air when this all began around 9 a.m., Those flights have all been diverted, mostly to Canada and to several other countries who have accepted our flights bound for areas in the United States. So we will keep you posted throughout the night as we learn any information as to where those flights have landed.
I think I had seen one figure at, as we look at a picture, I believe this is from a U.S. Air Force base in Omaha, Nebraska, of Air Force One there. There had been a figure of the number of stranded travelers at the Hartsfield Airport, which is what, Atlanta? Something in the neighborhood of 30,000 people, which of course that's a major hub, but you can imagine just the congestion and the confusion at America's airports. Again, we're hearing optimistically service would resume the earliest, optimistically, noon tomorrow.
And there you see the skyline in New York City. It is a sight that is still hard to imagine as you look there at all the smoke that has been coming from that site where once two of the tallest buildings in the world once stood when they were constructed, the very tallest, the two towers, the twin towers of the World Trade Center, now just no longer a part of New York City's skyline.
The majestic part of the New York skyline completed, I think it was, in 1972 and 73, the two towers there. Some 50,000 people worked in those buildings every day. And as you see, they are now erased from the Manhattan skyline there in lower Manhattan. Unbelievable when you think of the scope of 50,000 people who worked there, the countless of others who worked in surrounding buildings, heading to work at 9 o'clock or just before 9 this morning. And let's not forget the numbers who work in the Pentagon, which is that enormous hub for all of our military activity based in Arlington, Virginia. 20,000, I think, who work there.
There are so many people here in this area. South Florida is so tied to New York City and very tied to Washington. We're sure so many of you at home have loved ones and friends you've been trying to check on. If you have, as Craig and I have experienced today, you just cannot get through. The phone lines are jammed. You just won't get an answer, period, trying to reach cell phones or office phones. One bet for you might be email. That was one way I was able to reach a couple of friends to know that they are safe in that area where they work in lower Manhattan. A lot of folks experiencing this and just thankfully safe, but literally just stuck in their office buildings right now, waiting for some way to possibly even begin to get home, because most public transportation was suspended for a long time. We did hear about an hour ago that most of New York City's subways and public buses now are beginning to function normally, and hopefully these people can get back home and, most importantly, evacuate this area as the massive search and rescue effort continues.
Because we are seeing so much in the way of video that would lend to the impression that things are a bit chaotic, U.S. officials, the governor here in Florida, local officials, the mayors are all trying to emphasize that there is a sense of order and that government on the local level and the federal level, the government is doing its job. And that is why, as we heard earlier in some of the network coverage, there's been a big push for the president to return to Washington where his senior aides are as they craft some sort of response to what has happened here. We know that the defense secretary is still at the Pentagon in a secure room there. He apparently, we had heard earlier, was helping some of the victims who were wounded in all this until he was urged to get back to a secure part of the Pentagon there. U.S.
military on its highest alert, its Delta alert, as if war has been declared on the United States. Military fighters are patrolling the skies. They have secured the airspace all over the United States, especially over New York City and Washington.
We'll pause now and we'll go back to network coverage back in a little bit.
For joining us. Right now we're going to Professor
Barry Levin. He's of the University of California. He is a renowned terrorism expert. As they, of course, the main job here at the White House, or at the White House right now, is to figure out who might be responsible for this massive act of terrorism. Professor, thanks for being with us. You have obviously done a lot of study on any organization that could be responsible, that could have the kind of network that would carry out something like this. Who do you think is prime suspect number one?
Well, there are a handful of organizations. I think obviously Osama bin Laden is at the top of the list. Let me just say that we have to look at a couple of things. We have to look at who has a motive. There are tons of people throughout the world who do not like the United States. So there are a bunch of those kind. But who would have the opportunity and the means? That narrows it up a bunch. And I think one of the things that we've been seeing over the last couple of decades has been a decline in state-sponsored terrorism and an increase in these smaller autonomous but very well funded and expert organizations like bin Laden. That being said, I'd like to point out that we've been having an air attack going on against Iraq for some time. It hasn't gotten a lot of coverage, but we've been doing overflights practically daily now, so certainly that regime would also possibly have a motive, but right now it's pure speculation. The thing here that I think points to a Middle Eastern connection is the fact that we've seen similar activity like this in the past. Let me give you an example. About a decade ago, there was a plan to blow up 9 American airliners over the Pacific. That was thwarted by our law enforcement and intelligence community. In addition, recently, we've been starting to see an uptick in the anti-American rhetoric, and importantly, too, and this was something that we've noticed throughout those of us who monitor this stuff, that American-related targets were hit in Israel. The Sparrow restaurant was a heavily trafficked tourist destination in a part of Jerusalem that had Americans there. And
all right, Professor, I mean, I understand that, but you have to really narrow it down to which organization. I mean, we're putting pieces together here. Whoever planned this has to have people, number one, who can probably fly planes, but people who are so skilled that they can hijack not 1, but 4 commercial airliners at once. They can get through extensive airport security in Boston, at Dulles Airport in Virginia, at Newark Airport in New Jersey. What kind of organization is that well coordinated that can do this?
Well, I think we have organizations, but the fact of the matter is they have offshoots. So you can have someone who might throw somebody $1 million and say, learn what you have to learn to attack the great Satan, and try and keep enough distance so that it's hard to find out who it is.
Well, let me take you back to this plan when you were talking about a decade ago, and I remember what you're talking about. There was this plan coordinated to blow up 9 American airliners over the Pacific. It was thwarted. Who was behind it?
Fundamentalists from the Middle East.
Okay.
We're behind that. You know, additionally, look, there are a lot of people who don't like the United States, and I think right now, certainly bin Laden's at the top of the list for someone who has this kind of visceral hatred and the kind of money and planning and professionalism behind him. But I don't want to take out of the range of possibilities the fact that there might be intermediaries who might have been funded by someone who has the money, but not as directly connected as you might think. The new face that we're seeing today with terrorism are these terrorists that are not necessarily state-sponsored, but sponsored by mentors like bin Laden and the like.
Professor Brian Levin, terrorism expert at the University of California. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're joined now by Pat Robertson, coming to us from, I'm not quite sure where you are, Mr. Robertson.
I'm in Virginia Beach.
All right, good to see you. Of course, I think I know your reaction to this. I would expect your reaction to be a total revulsion. But what do you make of it?
Well, John, you know, we operated a television station in southern Lebanon since 1982 that was overrun by the Hezbollah. We've seen bombings. Our studio was car bombed a couple of times. We've been the victim of a mortar attack, etc. So we've seen these people operate. They were funded out of Iran through Syria. I've been twice with Yasser Arafat. Seen how heavily armed they are in Bethlehem, and I was just over in Israel, you know, at the end of July, and I saw what was necessary. The Israelis are under terrific pressure, and I knew they had to move in against the PLO, and when they did that, we would see Hamas, the Islamic Jihad, and these other groups come against America. I knew it. I told our staff on Labor Day that it was going to happen, and it happened just a little bit faster than I thought.
Well, Mr. Robertson, I got to say,
yeah,
the Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, and they can all drive Ryder trucks loaded with bombs.
Yeah.
And they can all go in a building with a bomb strapped to them. In this case, one has to believe at this point, until somebody proves it, that a terrorist got behind the yoke of the airplane and flew it into those targets. Who can do that?
Well, if you have $100 million, you can train a lot of pilots, and I think Osama bin Laden has $100 million plus. There is no doubt that the Gulf Arab states are funneling money into terrorist organizations. As a matter of fact, the Hamas is working out of Dallas, Texas. They had a big fundraiser. They take tens of millions of dollars out of the United States, money laundering out of here. So with that kind of money, you can set up training camps, you can hire pilots, and once an extremist gets the idea that if he blows up the great Satan, he's going to spend eternity in paradise with all those pretty women and everything that they promise him, then getting 4 suicide pilots isn't all that tough.
Pat Robertson, we thank you very much for your time. We need to go now to Senator Joe Lieberman of Connecticut. He's with us on the phone. Senator, we understand that there has been a meeting at the Capitol Hill Police headquarters of some leaders from Congress. What can you tell us?
Oh, there were between 25 and 30 of us members of the Senate who were over there this afternoon after we evacuated the respective office buildings, just following events and talking to one another, and I think it's important to say that, you know, we're united, obviously, across party lines. The country draws together at a moment like this. Our hearts are heavy. Our prayers go out to the families of those that suffered today. And our resolve is strong. And in the end, we reached out and called Senator Daschle and Senator Lott, our leaders. We expressed those feelings to them, and we urge them to bring us back in a session as soon as is possible from a security point of view, not for a legislative matter, a big open debate, but just to make clear, not to the American people, but also to those who have struck us today, that we may have been hit, but the American government, it's on its feet, and we're together, and we're going to go forward together and find who did this and make them pay for it.
Some individual lawmakers have called this an act of war. Is there a consensus among you?
Well, we live in such a strange age that it's hard to declare an act of war when you don't know who struck you yet. But by every measurement of what we know as war, and even looking back over our history, we have never been hit like this before. You'd have to go back, I think, somebody said to me earlier, to the War of 1812 to think about attacks in Washington. And of course, sadly, the deaths that resulted today are probably greater than that. This really is another day that will live in infamy.
Is there a plan for Congress to go back to some level of work tomorrow just to show that the United States government has not been shut down despite these attacks?
Yes, indeed. That's the last we heard from our leaders, and we're all, very few of us left the Hill, though we left the Capitol in our office buildings. And we're ready to go back at a moment's notice whenever the security agencies tell us it's safe to do so. That's the message we want to send out to America, that you know, we're a strong nation and we're going forward. Our hearts are heavy, but we're resolved to show these enemies of America that we're here and strong.
Senator Lieberman, we're here, but maybe as many as 10,000 of our fellow Americans aren't. That is a huge, huge number.
Hard to imagine, really, that this happened.
And it seems to cry out for action, not for investigation,
right,
and not for apprehension, and not for trial, and not for jail, but for action.
Right.
What action would you recommend?
Well, that's the complexity of this horrible situation. Obviously, first, you know, if you compare it to Pearl Harbor, we knew who attacked, and we responded. We declared war. Here, we don't really know yet who did this, but as soon as we find out...
Senator Lieberman, I apologize for interrupting you. We have news coming out of Israel. The Israeli government now speaking about these terrorist attacks. Shimon Peres at the podium explaining what's going on. Let us go there. I understand he's with us now. Mr. Peres, thank you for being with us.
Yes.
What is the Israeli government response to this? Who do you believe is responsible?
We feel that we have to handle every source of terror to identify countries that host or supports terror or terrorism and declare them as countries of terror. I think we have to turn to all the religious leaders to denounce suicidal terrorists. Look the damage they brought. And then our heart is with the United States, each of us feels today like being an American. Our heart are with the families, with the wounded people. But in spite of it, may I say, America paid a very high price, but America remained the only country that can save the world from this terrible jungle-like introduction.
Sir, it was reported. Sir, it was reported earlier today that the Israeli government believed that this was the work of Osama bin Laden. Is that true?
No, we don't have definite information, and we are not going to blame or to guess.
The Palestinian representative for the PLO here in the United States has said that there is absolutely no clue, there's no indication that any Palestinians were involved in this attack. Do you agree with him? Do you believe him?
I think it's a day for the Palestinians to take the opportunity and divorce terror from their own midst. It will help them. Let them go back. Let us come back to the table of negotiations. With terror, nothing will be achieved, because it doesn't matter who is just responsible for this case. Everybody who is engaged in terror is endangering humanity, is endangering normal life. And we have to really combine forces, because until now, you know, we have had armies without enemies. Now we have dangers without an army, without a strategy. We have to get ourselves organized globally, because terror is global, and bring an end to this terrible form.
Mr. Peres, did you have any word through your intelligence service that there was an attack coming on the United States? Did you have any sign?
Not specifically. And any information we would have, we would hand it over immediately. As we just now send our rescue team from the Army. We have one of the best in the world. They're on their way to the United States to participate and see if we can be of any help to save even a single life. We have also announced that tomorrow it will be a day of mourning for all the Israelis, because, as I told you.
Shimon Peres speaking to us live from Israel. We thank you, sir, very much for your time.
Let's go now to outside Pittsburgh, where our correspondent Steve Goldblatt is. Jeff Goldblatt is standing by at the site of that crash of the. Jeff, it's a United Airlines plane. It's believed to be at that site outside Pittsburgh, isn't it?
That's exactly right, John, with 45 people total on board. And one of the more profound things today, the imprint of terrorism seared not only on Wall Street, but also on Main Street. Here you have an area 80 miles to the southeast of Pittsburgh, and this plane, which went down at about 10 o'clock this morning. We have rescue vehicles that came in earlier in the day, and they have turned up nothing. No one believed to be alive from this crash. Some of the media just getting back to the scene, which is about a quarter of a mile up on a hill back behind me, and so some of the first pictures just starting to come in within the last hour. I want to get quickly to Chris Kanicki. He's a photographer with the Pittsburgh affiliate of Fox affiliate. He was back there just a couple of minutes ago, and Chris, I've seen the pictures. It looks like there's nothing there except for a hole in the ground.
Basically, that's right. The only thing you could see from where we were was a big gouge in the earth and some broken trees. We could see some people walking around in the area, but from where we could see, there wasn't much left.
Any large pieces of debris at all?
No, there was nothing that you could distinguish that a plane had crashed there.
Smoke, fire?
Nothing. It was absolutely quiet. It was actually very quiet. Nothing going on down there, no smoke, no fire, just a couple of people walking around. They looked like part of the NTSB crew walking around looking at the pieces.
How big would you say that hole was?
From my estimates, I would guess it was probably about 20 to 15 feet long, and probably about 10 feet long, or 10 feet wide.
What could you see on the ground, if anything, other than dirt and ash? And
you couldn't see anything. You could just see dirt, ash, and people walking around, broken trees.
You're more familiar with this area than I am, being from Chicago. The Somerset County Airport, it's just about 80, just a little ways away from here. Do planes typically go across this area, as far as you know?
Commercial jets usually fly across this area, but they're usually up probably 30,000 feet.
Okay, Chris Kanicki, thanks so much for that insight. We're here, John and Linda, throughout the afternoon and evening, and we'll be providing you updates. We're expecting Pennsylvania Governor Tom Ridge to be here shortly in press conferences throughout the evening. Now back to you in New York.
Jeff Goldblatt, we thank you very much. We have new footage coming in of the terrorist attack on the Pentagon. Firefighters still trying to fight the flames. This was part of, as you know, part of the outer ring. The E ring is what it's called, where the plane went down. It was actually a United Airlines flight, and it was near the helipad. It destroyed several layers of the building, and fire spread actually from the outer ring to some of the inner rings. However, we should make it clear that the Secretary of Defense is still there. He's still able to work. He's still able to coordinate with the Vice President and the National Security Advisor, who are in a secure facility inside the White House. The military command center in the basement is still functioning. They're coordinating military response. So a significant portion of the Pentagon, a symbol of military strength, has been severely damaged. However, the nucleus of the Pentagon still operates.
Linda, we go from the Pentagon to New York again. World Trade Center number 7 on fire. This is the one that David Lee Miller told us a little while ago has been on fire as a result of the crashes and the collapse of the 2 towers, and is now in danger of collapse itself. It would be, the fire officials believe that if it does become so unstable that it collapses, it would collapse to the south in Manhattan, where the towers collapsed to the north, by and large, and so we're keeping an eye on World Trade Center number 7, which is down in the immediate area of the two trade towers which collapsed. All this a result, of course, of 2 commercial airliners who were hijacked and then flown into the World Trade Center towers this morning about 9 a.m. Took an hour for those trade centers to just crumble, fall apart, and collapse. And still, no really good idea of how many of the 50,000 people that work in those 2 towers managed to get out. Not quite clear, and simple logic tells you that they probably all didn't, and that there must be a very, very large number of people who died in that collapse. Linda?
Back to the Washington angle of this, as we have reported, President Bush currently in the air. He's on his way back to the White House. He will join his National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, and the Vice President in a secure facility at the White House. They will be coordinating with the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, who is at the Pentagon at this hour. There is also a National Military Command Center working in the basement. They are coordinating a military response. We go to Colonel Bob McGinnis, who is with us in Washington, D.C., retired military officer, to explain a little bit more of what the military does here. Colonel, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Linda.
Let's go through some of the plans that have been put in place by the U.S. military. Number one, they have deployed a number of Navy ships to deal with search and rescue, to deal with triage. What exactly happens there?
Well, Linda, you've seen a host of things happening around the country that normally you don't see. You don't see F-14s, flying around Washington like you did today. You don't see DEFCON 4, where all the military installations across this country and 140 nations around the world have been shut in, and they're looking out, expecting imminent attack. And that's the sort of thing that the military is prepared to go to. Now, in the basement where Secretary Rumsfeld and his chiefs are sitting, they're looking at all the intelligence that's available from the CIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, etc. Now, what's unfortunate here is that we've obviously had a failure of human intelligence, which, of course, as you heard earlier, has been cut back radically over the years. Now, that failure, of course, is going to hamper our ability to quickly identify, except through forensics, perhaps, who it is that we ought to go after. You've heard about Osama bin Laden. You've heard about the Palestinian leader who spoke. The markings, though, the symbolism here of striking the Pentagon, striking the World Trade Center, and perhaps striking Camp David, if that was the target, that sends a clear message, perhaps, to those of us that are watching some of what's happening between Palestine and Israel. And having just come back from that part of the world, I will tell you, tensions and the dissatisfaction with the U.S. is at the highest I've seen it in 3 decades.
Colonel McGinnis, what dissatisfaction? I mean, what is it that everyone is so ticked off at the U.S. about? Is it the Israeli-Palestinian problem or something deeper, wider, farther, more widespread?
Well, John, that's part of it. Clearly, we give over $3 billion to Israel every year. The Israelis have been using our modern weapons to kill Palestinian leaders, and ostensibly, they've been going after even some of those that are connected to Palestinian or Hamas leaders in Palestine. Now, the other part is, of course, there's dissatisfaction, even according to polls and leaders in Europe, about the whole issue of national missile defense, about...
but you're not saying that dissatisfaction about missile defense would lead to someone from northern Europe to hijack planes and attack us, are you?
John, all the markings are that this is a fundamental Islamist circumstance where you have hundreds of Islamic groups, and many of which are very radical, but as some previous guests have indicated, they don't necessarily have the money, they don't have the wherewithal, as you pointed out, John, on 757 flights. You know, it takes the deep pockets of Osama bin Laden and the cooperation, perhaps internally within the U.S., of sympathetic organizations that could provide the mechanism. But the security of our airports is seriously in jeopardy here, because obviously at least 4 breaches, significant breaches of that security have taken place to enable this to take place.
Colonel McGinnis, hang on just a second. I should tell everybody that as we watch these pictures and discuss this and what happened, that President Bush is in the air from Offutt Air Force Base near Omaha and is on his way back to Washington. And he will address the nation tonight. We do not have an exact time, but when the president is back on the ground in Washington, he is going to address the nation about today's 4 terrible terrorist attacks, 3 of which actually struck the targets that they were intended. One of them, the hijacking that wound up in a crash in Pennsylvania, evidently did not get the intended target, although we're not certain what that target might have been. Maybe Camp David, maybe the Capitol, maybe the White House itself. It ended up in Pennsylvania in a crash. Meanwhile, 2 planes struck World Trade Center, 1 more struck the Pentagon. We now have to figure out how those planes were hijacked, how they were piloted, who did it, why, and what we do about it as a nation.
We are due to have some more information literally in the next couple of minutes from American Airlines and United Airlines, obviously involving those 4 airliners that were hijacked and all crashed. More than 200 people were aboard those planes. They have all perished. Many more believed dead at the attacks on the World Trade Centers. We will have live reports in just a moment.
And I'm John Gibson, along with Linda Vester, as we continue to cover today's terrible events. Terrorism hits America, hits it at the World Trade Center. Both towers hit by hijacked airliners, piloted, one assumes, by the terrorists. There you see the picture this morning from about 9 o'clock. A 757 hitting one of the World Trade Center towers. Both of those trade centers later collapsed. Also, 1 more hijacked airplane struck the Pentagon, and 1 more hijacked evidently did not hit its target and ended up crashing in Pennsylvania. It was thought perhaps it was headed towards Camp David, the presidential retreat in the mountains of Maryland.
The President of the United States is in the air. He is on his way back to Washington, due to arrive at the White House to join his Vice President, his National Security Advisor, and other top staffers who are in a secure facility inside the White House. He will coordinate with the Secretary of Defense, who is currently in the basement of the Pentagon. We go now to senior correspondent Rita Cosby. She has more late-breaking information from Washington. Rita?
Linda, Fox News has learned that American Airlines, which had 2 of its planes hijacked today, was just fined only 2 months ago for $99,000 from the FAA for failing to apply appropriate security measures on 6 of his flights. Now, this is significant because 2 of those flights departed from Boston's Logan Airport. Today, 2 flights that were hijacked left from Boston's Logan Airport. One was an American Airlines flight. Another was a United Airlines flight. Now, in the screening, FAA special agents determined last year that American Airlines transported unaccompanied luggage. Also, they failed to check passenger IDs. Remember, unaccompanied luggage is when they were supposed to associate a bag with a particular passenger. They said that they did not not do appropriate checks to make sure that bags were associated with a particular passenger. They also failed to ask proper security questions. This is obviously significant because a lot of focus is already on the FAA and also particular airports and airlines as to how these individuals may have gotten on board these planes. The other thing that's significant, we're told that the ground stop, of course, all the planes are now grounded domestically in the United States. They're all on the ground at this point. Several of them, international flights, are still flying to the West Coast. We're told just a handful are still in the air, but there's no word that there are any problems on board those flights. But the ground stop will be in effect until noon Eastern time tomorrow at the earliest. It will not be lifted before that. And after that happens, they are saying, the FAA, that there will be indeed many extra security measures in place. And certainly American Airlines and United Airlines will be looked at very heavily. And as Fox News has learned, American Airlines was just recently, just 2 months ago, fined for failing to apply appropriate security measures, allowing improper passengers on flights, not checking properly, and also with luggage as well. In addition to this, law enforcement sources are telling me that all the focus is still right now is the prime suspect, and again, they stress just a suspect, but all signs, they say, are still pointing as to Osama bin Laden as most likely being the candidate behind this, him and his group Al-Qaeda, which has been behind a number of additional attacks. They are saying that this group, and particularly Osama as the mastermind, are really the only ones that seem to have the specificity, the sophistication, also the coordination to carry out this type of attack. Law enforcement sources are saying no one has claimed responsibility, which is typical of the case when bin Laden's group has been involved in all the prior attacks that they believe he's been responsible for. He has never claimed responsibility. So they believe they're seeing a pattern of sophistication. And they do know that he was training pilots, was training suicide pilots in addition to other types of suicide bombers. So he certainly had the capability to carry this out. But at this point, nothing is firm. But that's where all signs are pointing towards, according to law enforcement.
Rita Cosby in Washington. Rita, thanks very much. Let's go now to James Baker, former Secretary of State, who joins us from Washington, D.C. Mr. Baker, we are looking at the people who survived this thing on the video, but there may be upwards of 10,000 people who did not. It is a huge, huge number. What does the United States of America do?
Well, it's a terribly tragic event. In my view, it moves us into probably another era, one that we've feared for some time would get here as far as our vulnerability to terrorism is concerned. And some of the things that we're going to have to do is to beef up particularly our human intelligence capabilities so that we're able to penetrate these groups. We've let those slide ever since the mid-'70s, and somehow we've always been it's always been a little offensive to us to do the kinds of things you have to do to be a clandestine spy and penetrate those groups. We're going to have to get back into that messy business. We're going to have to beef up our security measures. I just heard a little bit of your program before you came to me, and it's quite remarkable in my view that these people were able to get on these airplanes, pass through security, get their weapons on there, take control of the airplanes, get into the cockpits, and in 3 out of 4 cases, fly the planes into the targets they intended to hit.
It is amazing. Mr. Baker, I hope I'm not the first one to tell you this. We are going to learn over the next few days, many people we know have died in this thing.
That's right. No, you're not the first. I'm very aware of my close friend and Ted Olson's beautiful wife, Barbara, who died in the crash at the Pentagon.
Yes.
And that's very, very sad to me because she was not only a friend and colleague, she was someone with whom I spent a very intense 37 days down in Florida this year.
Yes. Look, we have had other terrorism incidents strike the United States, and you know, some big numbers of people, dozens, many dozens, hundreds, but this may turn out to be a few thousand.
Well, I think well, in my opinion, it will. We don't know that yet. We've had, of course, we've had other strikes at U.S. interests here recently that created a lot of casualties. The bombing of our embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, the bombing of the Khobar barracks in Saudi Arabia. We've never had one like this on the soil of the United States, nor particularly one as massive as this. We've always been able to roll up other attempts.
Well, my question is, let's just say hypothetically you could figure out it was Osama bin Laden. he is being harbored by the Taliban. He had to have somebody help him train these pilots. Not any old Cessna pilot can go fly a 757. They had to somehow spy and figure out how to avoid security. They had to do a lot of things that involved probably a lot of countries. Should we strike a list of countries who were involved?
Well, it depends on how much direct proof we have of the involvement of the countries. If we have direct proof that these actions were supported by state-sponsored terrorism policies in other countries, then we may very well want to do that. A lot would depend on what we find out. I've always been of the view, quite frankly, as terrorism has begun to build and as the risk to the United States has increased, that we ought to take a hard look at the provision of U.S. law that says we don't assassinate anybody. If we've got somebody out here masterminding an attack that kills 10,000 or 5,000 or 3,000 or whatever it is, innocent Americans in America, then it seems to me that it calls for rather drastic measures.
You would, just to put it bluntly, you would target individual leaders if you could establish that they had a connection to the act of terrorism.
If you could establish that they had a connection to the specific action, to the terrorism, and you established that without any question, and you were in a position to deal with them in a surgical way so that you're not killing other innocent civilians in the process.
James Baker, a former Secretary of State, speaking to us from Washington, D.C. today. Thank you very much.
Fox News has just obtained new footage of the collapse of one of the towers of the World Trade Center, as you know. First one commercial airline, then another slammed into those two towers this morning. A short while later, one tower collapsed, then another. This now home video footage, we want to show you.
I hope I live. I hope I live. It's coming down on me. Here it comes. I'm getting behind a car. It's incredible. Okay, I'm gonna have to go find people who need help. I don't think I'm one of them. You okay, sir? Okay. Can I just get a toot off your respirator? Yeah. Can I get a toot? I'm just getting a couple of clean breaths. That's good. Okay. Back to you.
It is a terrifying scene. We are told by those who operate the World Trade Center that this morning, shortly before 9 a.m. Eastern Time, when the first plane slammed into one of the towers, that the building was at full capacity, meaning that somewhere...
We'll pause from our network coverage from both CNN and Fox News Channel. We will get back to it momentarily, but right now, Craig Stevens with Lori Jennings, 7 News continuing coverage of the attack on America.
We have a series of live reports coming into us. Let's check in with Brian Glazer. He is in Midtown Manhattan, not far from the scene of this massive search and rescue operation. Brian, what can you tell us?
Good evening, Lori. Good evening, everyone in South Florida. We're about 2.5 miles north of the World Trade Center on top of the CNN Plaza Center at 5 Penn Plaza in New York, across the street from Penn Station. I want you to zoom in right now if we can, and I want to show you that tower number 7, building number 7 at the World Trade Center is now on fire. Most people know the World Trade Center as being 2 towers, which were leveled earlier today. But now we have a fire that has spread to building number 7. We have thousands of firefighters that are battling that blaze. Shortly, the National Guard will be in control of downtown Manhattan. And also, we understand that at least 150 people who were trapped in the rubble have now been freed. But that leaves an unknown number of victims still trapped in the rubble down in South Manhattan. As far as the situation, let me give you some basic raw numbers that we know. According to Mayor Giuliani, we have 1,500 walking wounded that are now being held at Liberty Island, where the Statue of Liberty is located in New York Harbor. Now, this scenario unfolded about 8 hours ago when 2 commercial jetliners, presumably under the control of armed gunmen or gunwomen who are hijackers and terrorists, had the two commercial airliners directed into the towers, crashing and then leveling the towers, causing a massive fire. People on the street ran for cover. Others were trapped under the rubble. Right now, the situation is that Grand Central Terminal, Penn Station, the Port Authority bus terminal are reopened only to let a few of the trapped travelers, commuters, to get onto buses and to trains back to the suburban areas of New York, New Jersey, and southern Connecticut and Long Island. But that has just reopened within the past hour. And the situation now is we're waiting for the National Guard to come into New York and take control of Lower Manhattan.
Brian, tell us, we've heard New York City has 170 hospitals. It's hard to imagine. They are all just inundated.
Oh, absolutely. Every emergency room is jammed. In fact, we saw an emergency physician here just a short while ago who was in the midst of the rubble. There are actually reports of ambulances heading upstate and some as far as Canada to help many of the wounded get the proper treatment. And of course, there is a major call out from the American Red Cross for blood donations in the New York area if you are in fact a certified blood donor. And I want to say something to the people of South Florida who have many, many relatives, obviously, in the New York metropolitan area. Phone service is very difficult here right now. Cell phones have not been working properly for most of the day. Getting in on some of the clogged lines here in New York, if you can, what the mayor's asking right now is let the city settle down a little bit, let's get a little bit more control, and then please phone your relatives. But right now, try to leave the phone lines open going into New York.
And Brian, the mayor has also insinuated that there are tremendous casualties, possibly even within the highest ranks of the fire and police departments there in New York City. Everyone had responded so quickly to the first attack, and they were right there on the scene during the second.
Well, I mean, the situation in Lower Manhattan is that you have the Federal Plaza, you have the New York City courts, you have the Stock Exchange. So much is clustered in this one area. It's one of the beating hearts of New York City, the other being Midtown Manhattan. This struck in a very vulnerable area, no question about it.
No question, right there by Wall Street and City Hall. And as you point out, that building number 7 burning right now. There are so many buildings, probably as many as 10 or 12 in that complex, in the base.
It's so hard to tell. The problem is that there is a huge cloud that's hanging over the southern portion of Manhattan that to really get a gauge of how large this problem is, how deep the devastation goes, I'm unable to give you that information at this time. I apologize.
That's all right. We'll be learning so much more in the next few hours. Brian Glazer, thank you for the update from Midtown Manhattan.
We have some more information and some new video that's just now coming into us at the Satellite Center. And we want to check in now with 7's Lynn Martinez, who can explain to us what we're about to see here. Lynn?
Craig and Laurie, you know, dozens of reporters on the scene during these attacks earlier today, and we've just received videotape here into the Satellite Center of one reporter in particular, works with WABC, who is in the middle of doing what we call a taped stand-up, a taped report, about a block away from the Twin Towers when one of the towers actually comes down, again, about a block away from him. That's what you're going to see. Take a look.
We can get to the base of the World Trade Center. You can see the firemen assembled here, the police officers, FBI agents, and you can see the two towers. A huge explosion now, raining debris on all of us. We better get out of the way.
We're going to look at that again, hopefully in slow motion again. Now, that reporter was one of dozens and hundreds of people who probably had no idea what was about to happen next. Again, he was about a block away, one of hundreds and thousands of people who were victims of the raining soot and debris and raining glass on top of him. He is okay. Lots of other people around him apparently are okay too. Again, we're getting lots of videotape here into the Sat Center and into the Newsplex of situations just like that, where people, amateurs and professional photographers and reporters, were right there as the attacks actually happened.
Unbelievable. And Jay Burkett from our station there in New York, happen to know him, hope he as well. That's just one of many unbelievable images that we've had to watch today.
And from right here in our Satellite Center, where we will continue to monitor the latest video, let's take you live to Washington, D.C. Reporter Skip Lozier. They're not far from the heart of the second massive search and rescue operation. Skip.
State of emergency still in effect here in the Washington, D.C. area. Smoke still billowing from the Pentagon, the southwest corner of the Pentagon, where a hijacked airliner crashed at about 9:40 this morning Eastern Time, punching a hole through the outer ring of Pentagon offices that are usually occupied by U.S. Army personnel. This city has changed in character a lot over the last few hours. evacuations of the Pentagon, the White House, the State Department, and all other government buildings, people being told to go home and stay home until further notice. As people go through, fight the fire at the Pentagon, try to get that fire out so that they can get rescue workers in there to see if anybody is trapped in the rubble.
Skip, there have been so many conflicting reports throughout the day as to where exactly the plane crashed, whether it was near the Pentagon, in the courtyard, or whether it skimmed part of the Pentagon. Can you give us your best description?
The description I have is that it actually hit on the outer ring. The outer ring, there are 4 rings to the Pentagon, offices going in literally a Pentagon shape. The outer ring, the plane apparently hit the outer ring and traveled through the outer ring itself, coming to rest just on the other side of it in a courtyard. Of course, it came apart in pieces.
We know President Bush is on his way back now to Washington. Can you give us a sense, based on what you've been able to figure out, what is happening at the White House among the National Security Team and the Vice President? What's happening there now?
Members of the National Security Team and the President and military officials are going over their options at this point. They still need to figure out who caused these terrorist attacks. Was it Osama bin Laden? Was it simply people associated with him? Was it another group entirely? We simply don't know. No one has called to accept responsibility for the attacks, according to the FBI. So before there can be a retaliation, and that I think is what is being considered, they have to figure out who they're going to retaliate against.
Skip, I think you had told us earlier that Senator Biden of Delaware and Warner of Virginia had said that Congress should meet tomorrow to take up all of this, but we don't know yet whether that will happen?
No, we do not know whether that will happen, although we are hearing that the Armed Services Committee will probably meet tomorrow, and that means Senator Warner will call it to action. He wants a briefing from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Central Intelligence Agency. They want answers to find out why it was that people could get in and do what they did today.
All right, Skip Lozier.
Yeah, Skip, before you go, have you heard any reports of any threats that were delivered to the White House?
I have heard no reports of threats that were delivered to the White House. I should mention to you that the British government is warning all of its citizens around the world to be careful over the next few days, that there may be another terrorist attack on U.S. interests, or maybe another terrorist attack in the United States itself. So at least it's possible this madness is not over.
Shocking news. All right, 7's Skip Lozier reporting live for us from Washington, D.C., the site of the second crash site there, the site of this massive search and rescue effort, still underway now, so many hours after this third plane struck the Pentagon.
Well, you know, Skip, talking about the threat that possibly that there could be more to come, certainly not something we want to think about on a day like today based on what we've seen, but something that U.S. officials meeting in Washington at this hour probably are contending with, that possibility that may in fact be the case. We'll pause here. We'll rejoin our network coverage. We do urge you to stay tuned to 7 News for continuing coverage from here back down our network.
Real-time intelligence, or we have not spent the money necessary to have, as you put it earlier, the messy business of spies. Do we have the capability of going back in sort of a forensic fashion and figuring out who did what?
We may well have. Again, it's going to depend to a great degree on how closed-mouthed these people were. If they were as professional as they seem to be, it may well be that there is no evidence. But on the other hand, there is also no question that you can go back and not quickly necessarily, but you can very often establish precisely the kind of information you're looking for when you know what's already happened, but you can't do it beforehand.
Mr. Eagleburger, hold on just a second. Richard Shelby, the ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, is speaking now in Washington. Let's listen in.
Families that were lost today, and we should be, but we've got to realize that this is a wake-up call for America. A lot of us have been talking about terrorism, counterterrorism, how to deal with it. We live in an open society, and we're not going to live in a bunker, and we shouldn't. And I'll see what goes on in this meeting in here, but I think the bottom line is we were basically caught flat-footed, and we've lost a lot of people, and that's sad.
Who's responsible, Senator?
Well, I'm not here to blame anybody. I'm just here to say that we've got to do better.
Based on what you were told today by First Lieutenant and based on your briefings in the past, do you think it was bin Laden?
I can't say that, but a lot of things point to it was either. I would think it would either be Osama bin Laden's cell or some other cell similar to it or kin to it or spin-off from it. But I can't say that yet. Maybe later today there'll be some more specific information.
Insofar as some of the terrorist groups have made a point of criticizing American policy towards Israel, is it...
Let me interrupt right here. Richard Shelby talking. Building 7, the World Trade Center number 7, has collapsed. It was expected to go, and it finally has. So that is 3 buildings in New York City that have collapsed in today's terror attacks.
We should clarify that Building 7 was not struck with anything. This is actually part of a chain reaction that began when the 2 towers of the World Trade Center were hit by those 2 commercial airliners, caught on fire and then collapsed. So this is part of the chain reaction, simply as it continued to sort of devastate buildings around the area in Lower Manhattan. Once again, this is basically a state of emergency in Lower Manhattan as they try to rush rescue personnel to the scene.
And down there, standing beside our camera, is our correspondent, David Lee Miller. David, fill us in. David Lee Miller, can you hear me?
Let's go, please. Back it up.
Oops.
Let's go.
All right, they're telling our correspondent, David Lee Miller, to get out. So as we watch the Trade Center building number 7 collapsing, and the police are moving the camera crews, get out, get out, get out. Let me there's still more.
We take you now to Miami-Dade Mayor Alex Pinellas, who first addressed the area around 11:30 and now again at 5:30 p.m.
Not under state of emergency. 30 seconds.
The mayor will hopefully bring us some vital information about where you can donate blood, where you can help out if you're sitting home feeling helpless on this tragic day. The mayor will give us an update of the situation around the county.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. As I expressed earlier this morning, on behalf of all of us here at the EOC and on behalf of all the people of Miami-Dade County, we want to express our condolences to all of the victims and the families of this horrible tragedy. As the hours have passed, we have now become aware of people with very close South Florida connections who we believe have been victimized by this horrible terrorist attacks, and of course we express our condolences to their families. As we said earlier today, there has been absolutely no evidence at any time today that South Florida or Miami-Dade County is under any threat. Our intelligence units have been in close contact throughout the day with federal authorities, and we reiterate what we said earlier today, that at no time during today have we felt that this community has been under any threat. As I reported to you earlier today, the county did, however, take several precautionary measures which have continued. This EOC, our Emergency Operations Center, has been operating at a level 2 throughout the day. It will probably continue so throughout the night, although I do want to clarify that at no time have we declared a state of emergency. We are on alert. We do have heightened security throughout the county. We are at a level 2, but we have not issued a state of emergency. But most of our county agencies and federal counterparts and other important departments and agencies are located here at the EOC and have been working with us throughout the day. As you all know, earlier this morning we made the decision to evacuate several county office buildings. I do want to report at this time that tomorrow all of the evacuated county buildings will be open for business, regular business hours. We are expecting all county employees to report to work tomorrow. Of course, there will be heightened security. All employees are asked to clearly wear their identification badges since there will be heightened security. But as far as county operations go tomorrow, we are returning to normal, but with heightened security, of course. We also know, of course, that there will be several federal buildings that will remain closed, but our buildings will open tomorrow. Miami International Airport will resume operations upon clearance by the FAA. That's an issue that really is out of our control. There have been some reports today that may happen by noon tomorrow. Obviously, once the FAA clears the airport, it will be up and running again. We have been working with local area hotels to accommodate stranded passengers. We have not had many reports of problems in that area, and we certainly want to thank a lot of the local area hotels who've worked with us. The seaport similarly is under heightened security, but operations should resume tomorrow. As it relates to Miami-Dade County Public Schools, adult classes, evening activities today are canceled. So athletic activities, adult classes, things of that nature for this evening are canceled. However, Miami-Dade County Public Schools will open tomorrow. That is, we've been in contact throughout the day with the superintendent, and they have made the decision, and we concur that our Miami-Dade County Public School system should be open up tomorrow morning. Private schools, for example, the Archdiocese has announced that Catholic schools will open, but to be safe, we urge the parents of students in private schools to contact the school and find out specifically whether they will be open tomorrow or not. Our transit systems are working, operating regularly, again with heightened security, but they are working with regular service. All critical facilities in the county are under a heightened security plan and will remain so until further notice. As you know, the tolls in our major expressways have been lifted at least through the remainder of this evening. They may resume collecting tolls later this evening or tomorrow, but at least through 9 o'clock tonight we believe that tolls will not be collected. Our urban search and rescue team is on alert. An advance team has been dispatched. An advance team has been dispatched, and the larger group is waiting direction as to where they should report for duty. Let me take this opportunity to once again urge our residents who have any questions or issues or have heard rumors not to call 911. We've been inundated with